Here's some concepts tonight we're going to be discussing. Cognition. Very simple. I just want to lay them out here at the beginning so we understand what we're talking about. Cognition, psychological term, meaning the mental processes of acquiring knowledge. Animism, the belief in spirits or life in the inanimate realm. Very common feature of religious theory. And then anthropomorphism, from anthropos and morphe in Greek, which is to attribute human qualities to non-human people, places, and things. All right? Why are we dealing with these concepts? Because they're all central to a discipline, subdiscipline of religion called the cognitive science of religion. And Stuart Guthrie here is the foremost theorist in this area and scholar with this book, Faces in the Clouds, a new theory of religion, he says. And this theory is quite simple on one level, as these things go. Religion is anthropomorphism, he says. Religion is attributing human characteristics to people, places, things, and forces that are not human. It's a kind of advance of animism, where it's much more particular, it's much more human-like. So tonight, I want to lead you through this new theory of religion in as painless a way as possible. I've read his book, so you don't have to. He says he's doing three things in the book, three aspects of this theory that he calls ethnographic, analytic, and evidential. So let's dispense with those technical terms and say what we do, why we do it, and how it's done. All right? What we do, why we do it, and how it's done. In terms of religion, says Guthrie. What we do? Well, what we do is we see as plausible a continuum of human-like beings from gods to Thomas the Tank Engine. You know this, right? We love anthropomorphic figures. We love, I believe that's Mount Washington there. Oh, that's New Hampshire, the old man in the rock. Well, we love to see these things. And it's not just the seeing, there's also usually a message. Now, it's typically a symbolic message, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a direct message as from a God, right? So, and again, what I'm doing here is I'm kind of circling, and then we're going to get a little closer the next time through. I want to introduce you to these concepts, and then we'll dig into them. Why do we do this? Again, according to cognitive science, why do we create these beings, and why especially do we read messages from them or imagine them as communicating? Well, this is pretty interesting, I think. The world is uncertain and always changing, and so you have to think of this in terms of evolutionary psychology, right? As we develop as a species, we are thrown into a world that is strange and hostile. So we have to find our way through this world. It's uncertain, it's always changing. What do we have to do? We have to read the world. We have to read our surroundings for pure survival. We have to know that darkness is not our friend. Paul Simon to the contrary. We have to, thank you for getting that. I appreciate that. We have to learn that light is best for us. We have to learn that certain things hanging from trees are good and provide sustenance. Other things hanging from trees can do the opposite. We have to map our world. That requires interpretation to live. Now, the cognitive science of religion says that interpretation is directed toward the most significant possibilities. Okay, we're going to explain this more. the best bet. All right. So if it's dark and I'm on a savanna somewhere, my fire has gone out, and I can't perceive very much at all, and I hear a noise, I have an interpretive option here, right? My best bet for survival is to interpret that noise as something dangerous, as a predator, right? That's pretty clear, right? Furthermore, I want more than just that best bet. I want the highest bet. And the highest bet is always the one that is most like me. So what will I do on that savanna with my campfire out and I hear a noise? One thing I might do is call out, signaling, I'm human, are you? The higher bet, you see. Now, from this, we get how we do it, is through these mechanisms I've mentioned before of animism, anthropomorphism, as defined by cognitive science. Let me give you an example of this. It's hard to talk about these categories, which are pretty refined. And I've been listening to a lot of these lectures and reading a lot about this, and I get lost. Remember what we do. We don't understand something. We immediately have to interpret it. In fact, we're going to see later that perception and interpretation, there's no lag at all. We have to put it within a framework. And the higher the framework, the better our bet generally. We'll get back to that. So let me show you a scene from the greatest movie ever made, Jim Jarmusch's Dead Man. Let me set it up for you. Johnny Depp here is an accountant who's traveled from Cleveland to the 19th century American West. He's lost, he's injured. He's fortunate in that a Native American named Nobody has found him. He's taken him away, giving him protection and food. And now Bill Blake, accountant from Cleveland, wakes up and sees that he's being cared for by this Native American named Nobody.
The round stones beneath the earth have spoken through the fire.
What?
Things which are alike in nature grow to look alike. And the speaking stones have lain a long time looking at the sun.
The speaking stones?
Some believe they descend with the lightning, but I believe they are on the ground and are projected downward by the bolt. Did you kill the white man who killed you?
I'm not dead.
What name were you given at birth, stupid white man?
Blake. William Blake.
Is this a lie? Or a white man's trick?
No. I'm William Blake.
Then you are a dead man.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Is your name really William Blake?
Yes.
Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn And every night, some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to endless night.
I really don't understand.
But I understand, William Blake. You were a poet and a painter. And now you are a killer of white men. You must rest now, William Blake. Some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to endless night.
So this is Bill Blake from Cleveland, who's lost and wounded in the 19th century American West. Nobody is a Native American who happens to have been educated in white schools. So when the Johnny Depp character says, he says, what name were you given at birth, stupid white man? And Bill Blake says, William Blake. And nobody freaks out because in nobody's worldview, there's William Blake, the poet and painter. And so he immediately associates him with the poet and painter because he's placing the biggest bet, you see? So I have a misunderstanding. I asked for clarification. Oh, now I have an understanding. I'm going to put this framework around it. And it actually carries through the whole film. And the metaphor here is that when we use animism, use the mechanism of animism, but especially anthropomorphism, that's upping our bet to someone who is within our knowledge, which is more like us, or which is more resonant with the knowledge we already have. All right. So it's a kind of projection, right? Because he's not William Blake. He's a kind of doofus accountant from Cleveland. And part of the film is when Bill Blake, the accountant, actually kind of becomes William Blake, the poet, painter, and in this case, killer of white men. All right, so let's walk through this and see if we can get there. Again, cognitive science tells us that perception is interpretation. So, like I said before, there's no pause. You don't see something and then think, what is that? No, it's instantaneous. As Wittgenstein said, to see is to see as. So there's no lapse. You're immediately putting something that you see into an interpretive framework. What would that be anyway if you didn't do that, right? It would always be in a framework. Nobody puts Bill Blake in his framework. The great art historian E.H. Gombrich said, perception is betting. All right, so when you put it into an interpretive framework, it's not usually to show less significance, it's to show more significance. Why? Well, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, because the more significance might have to do with your survival, or at least with your thriving. Okay? That's what we mean by higher betting. Now, so there's really three steps here. Let me not get confused or confuse you. Perception is interpretation. Interpretation seeks meaning. Meaning is organization. All right? So, interpretation seeks meaning. We almost never seek a lack of meaning in our perception. And interpretation is selective, right? So you have to ignore certain things and you have to accept certain things and contextualize other data. For example, if you're working and you drop your pen, right? You're working in your living room and you drop your pen and you look down at the carpet or the floor, your interpretation is directed. Significance comes when you find the pen. That's what you're betting on, right? Is finding the pen. Now you might find some change. You might find a tear in the carpet or a hole in the floor. You've contextualized that out. You might see it, but you're seeking significance of the pen. Meaning is organization. We are prone to seek organization. Why? Just read any creation story around the world. What is that story? That is a story of chaos and order, right? You begin without form and void. And by the end, you've named all the animals, you've named the days, evening and morning, and man and woman, and now you have order. In fact, that's probably what's driving most of this perceptual apparatus, is that we are avoiding chaos. We do not do well with chaos because it's not, among other things, it's not a good survival mechanism, right? Chaos. What are some of these mechanics? How's it work? I love these concepts. So these are psychological concepts, again, from cognitive scientists of religion. I love this first one. It sounds like a young adult novel or something. Hyperactive agency detection device. All right. All that means is you are expecting agency. Children expect agency. We expect agency. And by agency, I simply mean someone doing something, right? So again, if you're on the savannah, your campfire has gone out, and you hear a noise, most likely you're going to ascribe agency. Someone or something did that. Why? Because that's your best bet. If you ignore that, it's a limb falling from a tree. That can be dangerous, right? So place the higher bet for your safety, and ultimately, as we'll see, that's how you make a god too. Teleological reasoning. Again, I apologize for these jargony terms, but these are the ones they use. Teleological just means toward an end. So studies of children have found that they have no problem ascribing teleology or function to certain things. So for one of the tests was psychologists showed children a picture of an animal surrounded by pointed rocks. The children were asked why the animal, would be asked why the animal had smooth skin or long necks, but then they are asked, why do you think the rocks were pointy? What do you think the answer is? Well, they were pointy because little bits of stuff got piled up on top of one another for a long time. That's a pretty good scientific explanation. But the other is they were pointy so the animals wouldn't sit on them and smash them. Well, children are really dumb, right? That's not right. Except that's teleological thinking, right? The objects are there for the end use that I see in them, right? Which is to keep the animals from sitting on them and smashing them. Again, repeated tests have shown that this is part of children's reasoning, teleological reasoning. God concepts. By the way, the person I'm basing most of this on is a guy named Justin Barrett, who's at Fuller Seminary, just over here. Again, I don't want to bore you too much if you don't like these studies, but children were shown a box of crackers that contained stones. And they were asked whether the adult human beings and God would know what was in the cracker box or be fooled by the appearances. 3-year-olds easily attributed super knowing to both God and humans. So God knows what's in the box, even if it's not crackers. So does mommy and daddy. Isn't that interesting? This diminishes later on, of course. And it starts to diminish at about 4 and 5, where they say, yeah, mommy doesn't know that, but God does. Sometimes it doesn't diminish at all, by the way. Minimal counterintuitive reasoning. This is just, again, this just means that if you take something ordinary and you just add a little something, that it really sticks, it really resonates. So a carpet, a rug, is pretty ordinary. But what if you tell a child that the carpet or the rug can talk? It's a magic carpet. Not only can it talk, it can take you places. That resonates, right? But if you go too far, right, if you try to make up something that's really not plausible, they won't buy it. And of course, if it's just a carpet, so what? So there's this sweet spot in between excess and minimalism where religion is born. Because you can take basic understandings and just add a little layer to them. I guess it's not a little layer if the carpet can talk, but it's little to them. They don't see it as significant. And then religion is adaptation. Some of these scholars have studied religion as an evolutionary adaptation. Isn't that interesting? Does it help the survival of a species, our species, of course, if we are religious? Studies are inconclusive, of course, and they're just beginning, but the answer seems to be yes. And it doesn't seem to be based on individual orientation or choice. It simply seems to be based on participation in a recognized religious form. Here's what I mean. I think it was Pascal Boyer who did these studies of kibbutzes in Israel, and one was kind of secular and one was very religious, and the participants in the religious community were generally better adaptive. They shared better, they were kinder, they were less antagonistic. There was another study, I forget who did this, about church going, right? What happens to people who go to church versus those who don't? There seems to be a general better adaptation, that is social adaptation. People act better if they go to church, right? And one part of that study was very interesting because people who went to church didn't go because they were believers necessarily. So like there was a woman who had a husband who was an atheist. He went to church with her in the study. He got the same benefits, right? So something about communal social interaction that is is an evolutionary adaptation. Now there's a whole bunch of other stuff like costly signaling and stuff that I don't want to get into because it's too complex. And I think you get the point by now anyway, but let's tell some stories. So again, anthropomorphism, animism, imparting spirit, life, or even human qualities to non-human situations. I was out on a mesa near Acoma Pueblo, and I was researching a book I did on a Laguna Pueblo writer named Leslie Mormon Silko. And she has this very powerful story called The Boy Who Turned Into a Bear. And so that story and all her stories were kind of resonating. And I'm out on the middle of this mesa, and I tell you, there is no one for 20 miles. And I'm alone out there, and it's great. But I come around a corner, and there's a bear. And I'm like, oh my God, I never even, what am I supposed to do? And I froze, and you know how the hair, they say the hair on your back of that happened to me. And my legs, my knees started shaking, except it was a rock. But I had bear stuff in my head, right? And so it was real easy for me to make that bet. Because that's a better bet. If you're alone on a mesa, that's a better bet than to say, that's just a boulder. I'm not going to pay attention to that. There's someone here in the audience I know who got some pepper spray once and was walking along, and a terrifying plastic bag came out at her, and she sprayed down the plastic bag. Now, if you know the film American Beauty, you know what a sacrilege that is, right? To spray the bag with pepper spray. I was once in New Mexico camping, again, far away from everyone and everything, northern New Mexico, Chama. And I had driven back in probably 10 miles to this campsite that was by a lake, and it was frozen over. And it's January. Snow's everywhere. It's bleak. You know, it gets dark at 3:30. So you go into your tent, and it's freezing, and so you wrap up. And I don't know if you've ever done winter camping, but you have a nylon sleeping bag, and if it's cold, you pull it over your face like this. It has a little shield. And so you're sleeping like this with this little hole that you breathe out of, and so your face is covered. And of course, dark, lonely, away from anyone. I heard something. It was snow, so I could hear it coming from far away. And I always slept with a hunting knife in my bag, but I thought, that's silly, I don't need that. But I heard it, and I thought, and then you start the process, right? You start betting. Is that a deer? Cool. What if it's not a deer? Let me listen. It sounds like maybe 2 feet instead of 4. Uh-oh. Again, human, even more dangerous, higher bet. I couldn't place it, but it just kept coming. And so I slide my hand down to my knife, and I don't know what I'm going to do because I'm wrapped up in this sleeping bag, and I'm in a tent, and, whatever it is, I don't have a chance anyway, but that doesn't matter because this isn't rational. And so it comes, and it comes, and it comes faster and faster and faster. And then it's right at the tent. And then I realize that it's my eyelashes brushing against my sleeping bag. And as it got closer, I was doing this. Again, it's a good bet that it was a wolf. I looked like an idiot, felt like an idiot, but it was still a good bet. We ascribe agency to things automatic. Well, no, I don't want to say it's automatically. Generally, because it's a better bet. Those are like individual stories. A few decades ago, we had a cultural global phenomenon like this in crop circles, and that these crop circles appeared. You remember this? And the designs were intricate and symmetrical, and we're like, what's this about? And so many people immediately went to, this is extraterrestrial, or this is some force, or this is some consciousness that is making these. Again, that's a pretty good bet, but of course we have other forces at work here, and those forces, in fact, ended up showing that these were pranksters, very sophisticated pranksters who knew geometry. And so we made a bad bet. That's okay. We make bad bets all the time. Do you know the Lumiere brothers and the arrival of the train? This is another cultural example that is shown to a lot of film students. This is one of the first, I don't know the exact history, it's one of the first moving images that the Lumiere brothers showed in a theater. And it's the arrival of the train at La Ciotat. And this is what moviegoers saw. Now the story goes, oh, I see what you did there. The story goes, it may be apocryphal, that audience members fled because the train was coming at them, right? That's a good bet if you think a train is coming at you. But of course, other factors eventually come in. Your initial interpretive bet does not pay off. Not much is lost. Maybe you look like an idiot or whatever, but you didn't get run over by a train. So, animism, believing that there is some, well, first of all, I would say agency, believing that there's some agency behind what happens in your perception, unless you know better, is a good bet. Agency. Children know this all the time. Animism is a higher bet. Better to think, again, in terms of evolutionary survival, better to think that there's a spirit at work or some other force than to just blow it off as something ordinary. Again, if it's appearing outside your normal perceptive grid. Anthropomorphism is the largest and best bet of all, that there's a God. Now, if you have been following along, you probably have been thinking of Pascal's wager, right? This is a French philosopher who said, it is better to believe in God than not to believe in God. Why? Well, if you believe in God and you're right, dude, you're in. You're right. You're going to heaven. You're going to live forever. Awesome. You bet or believe that there's a God and there isn't? All right, you still lived a good life. You were wrong, but you lived a moral life, we hope. So, we have seen this. It doesn't get talked about a lot, but we have seen this in philosophy, anthropology, and religious studies. As early before Plato, there was a Greek named Xenophanes who said this, talking about the gods. He said, if cattle and horses and lions had hands or could paint with their hands and create works as men do, horses like horses, cattle like cattle, also would depict the god's shapes and make their bodies of such a sort as the form they themselves have. In other words, if cattle could talk about gods, they'd talk about cattle gods. Same for horses. Why? Because the anthropomorphic principle is at work. Francis Bacon said, our knowledge is clearly related to the nature of man instead of to the universe. We look for ourselves more than we look for something else. Hume, David Hume, universal tendency among mankind to see all things like themselves. Ludwig Feuerbach, anthropologist, sociologist, kind of theologian. Theology is anthropology, he said. Theology is anthropology. Two people he influenced very much, Friedrich Nietzsche. Even the scientist looks for, I love Nietzsche, he's got to write it this way, an infinitely broken echo of an original sound, that of man, as the manifold copy of an original picture of man. And then you know Marx, right? Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature. Listen, look and hear the images. The sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. Now, this is counterintuitive, so stay with me, and we'll get to all your questions. But you should know that we tend to think of gods as separate when, in fact, they're actually pretty close to us, not just in terms of form, but in terms of behavior and on the spectrum of being, let's just say. So there was a time when gods were seen as notable figures that over time became divine. So there's another Greek named Euhemerus who says that all myths are this. And that you get gods just by telling the stories over and over again of these notable human beings. And then in that process, they become divine. We know that dead relatives are often venerated, not necessarily worshiped, but attributed great power, right? So in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, dead ancestors must be appeased or they will mess with you. In China, they're a little less malevolent, but still you have to pay respect to the dead ancestors. Or so again, the point here being that the human God continuum is a continuum. It's not a sharp line. National heroes are attributed godlike status, not only in ancient Greece with Hercules and Achilles, etc., Odysseus, but even in civil religion, even in the public sphere, national heroes take on divine qualities. Powerful forces do. In fact, we still use the phrase for a disaster that it was an act of God. That's a legal phrase, meaning it was a force beyond us. Our gods in the history of our relationship with them have been human companions. They've been our sexual partners. They've been human beings themselves, as you say, and etc. We get this most, I think, eloquently in something the Jews call the imago Dei, or the image of God. And it comes from one verse in the Torah, and that is Genesis 1:27. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Pretty succinct and powerful. All right. How do we make a God? Well, that's cheating because we don't do it consciously. We do it unconsciously, according to cognitive scientists. But if we were to make a God, if I were to answer the question in the title, it would be this: experience something you do not understand. Bet that that something is of the highest order, bigger, more powerful than you, but like you. Because if this being is too much unlike you, then what is there to say about this being, right? Assign that uncertainty anthropomorphic features, because that's your highest and best bet, is that this is human-like. Now make those features divine, as I was saying, give power, knowledge, other features to this being, and invest it, most importantly, invest this being with symbolic features that you can read back to learn about you. Right? That's the move, is to take the God within and project her out, then read her back. I don't know why that is, but we love that process, right? Maybe it's because we can't look in and see clearly, or we don't want to, or we're blocked in other ways. But if we take what's within and put it out, whether it's art, story, God, read it back, that works. We like that. Moreover, other people like it too. And so how to make a God? Make art, right? Make something, project it into the world, read it back for meaning. Now, I've been avoiding a question, right? What if there's God? What if we didn't make God in our image, that we are made in his, and he's out there watching me give this lecture? Well, Justin Barrett happens to, the guy I've been using mostly in this lecture, happens to be a Christian. And I've seen him struggle with this question because he's a cognitive scientist of religion. So he's about data, he's about qualitative and quantitative data, and he's about these models, and he's about cognition, and he really can't answer it. He struggles. He's a very articulate, engaging speaker, but when he's asked this question, he can't really say. Now, I suppose one answer, and he mentions this as a possible answer, is that God put that process in us, that anthropomorphic urge. Francis Collins, who's a geneticist, I believe, who says that very thing. He had some, I'm sorry, I'm so inarticulate. He's a renowned scientist and a Christian who says that at some point in human evolution, God put a gene in our brain. He says this. Now, that's a great deus ex machina, we say in literary studies, where God just comes in and fixes everything. It's kind of bizarre, and again, it feels like cheating. On the other hand, you know these new atheists, right? Richard Dawkins and I forget the others, but you've probably seen them. They love this, right? They love this because, aha, religion is just an evolutionary adaptation. In fact, as the scientists, the cognitive scientists say, it's kind of an accident. Oh, they love this. See, I told you religion was false and we should get rid of religion. These guys drive me crazy because they take the worst possible understanding of religion and attack that. You know, religion as stupid superstition. That's not religion. That's not what religious scholars think religion is. But yeah, go ahead, attack superstition. Fine. Meanwhile, we're going to keep making meaning in our lives, which is what religion is, if you ask me. It's how you make meaning. In fact, religion is the meaning that matters most to you. It's the meaning that matters most. Now, notice that it can be any meaning. Your religion can be the Los Angeles Rams if you want it to be. Bless your heart, if that's true. Your religion can be Judaism. Your religion, in this sense, can be atheism. because it matters so much to you. Your religion can be you, since we're in Los Angeles. I am my own religion, right? So, what does this mean? I think the theists, I just don't buy this cheating, this thing that looks like cheating, like God put this in us. And I don't like these atheists. I feel like they're being disingenuous by treating the most superficial and generally incorrect view of religion. So what's left? What's left is what these philosophers have said. Merleau-Ponty, we are condemned to meaning because we are condemned to language. Paul Ricoeur, man and woman are language. Stuart Guthrie, the person who wrote Phases in the Clouds, there is no religion without relationship. No relationship without communication. No communication without language. And no language without likeness. That's, for me, what it all means, is that we are symbol-using creatures. And we love to take what's inside us, make a symbol out of it, project it, and read it back, because then we can see it clearly. And whether that's God or beauty or goodness or truth, we have a long history of doing that very thing. All right. Question, yes.
So what about like concepts of Atman or Hindi?
Right.
Like transcendent, evolved, rational thinking. And
Excellent.
Because this sort of exists in one sphere. And then...
Yep. Excellent question. The question is, what about Atman? What about the sense of self in Hinduism, which is ultimately no self at all, because there's only one self, only one thing? That's an excellent question, and that's a problem with Guthrie's approach. So early in the book, he has to deal with things like that. What about religions without gods? And such as Hinduism, early Hinduism, or Upanishadic Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism. I think he cheats. He says they're not religions. Or he says, well, Buddhism and Hinduism later get gods. They have Ganesha, they have Shiva, they have, and so do Taoists.
Like Native American religion,
Right. Well, now that would work better in Guthrie's argument, because there is this sense of the Wakan Tonka among the Plains tribes gets translated as the Great Spirit, so whatever you want to think of it. Something other that is anthropomorphic. And again, to be anthropomorphic, you don't have to have a body. So he will say, for example, to mystics, there's another example, right? Mystics who say God is unknowable. He says you still talk about God in human terms, which to me puts me back in the symbol arena, right? So this is how we use our symbols. This is how we make meaning using symbols. So this is great critique of Guthrie there. I think he cheats that a little bit.
For me, there's a dichotomy here, because this approach is essentially how do we understand God as people, as humans?
Right. Right.
And many religions espouse a soul.
Yes. Yes. Right.
And so I think trying to make an explanation using the wrong tool.
Oh, okay.
Right? To explain, to know, to understand and explain God isn't really possible as a human, because what you've just very eloquently shown here, demonstrated, is that we, as humans, will reach out for stuff that we can touch, because within reach, that is understandable.
Yes.
Right?
Because what other choice do we have?
Well, the choice is to accept that God is unknown.
That one, yes.
Right?
Right. But then where does it...
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
If God was like us,
Right.
It wouldn't be God.
Right.
We're all gods in that
Right.
way, right?
That's right.
So I find that there's this dichotomy between wanting to understand something
Yes.
and then accepting that we're just not able to.
Yes. Yes.
That's not a failing.
Yes.
Right?
No,
Because
I'm with you.
We don't have the tools.
Right. This is the mystical approach again. I mean, we can name it other things, but it's mysticism, right? And so think about mysticism and how mysticism works. It works by, it's called apophatic theology, just so you have another jargony term to hear. It's called the via negativa. How do you get to God if you're a mystic? By the negative way. You find where God isn't, and you keep moving. Is there an end? No. Or maybe. We don't know. Doesn't matter. Right. Exactly. So I think that's why your critique is very good, and yours too, is that that's not good enough for Guthrie to say, yeah, you still speak in general anthropomorphic terms. I think most of these traditions, the mystical traditions, the esoteric traditions, are going to say exactly what you said. Yes.
So, using your example of the farm, the thing of wild, assigning the best bet, it seems like it's all coping with fear.
Yes.
And the ultimate fear, death, absolutely, right?
Yes.
If you remove fear, then, and we can recognize our surroundings now,
Yes.
what is the bet? Is there, if we come as a civilization, as a society, to this particular
Right.
point where
Right.
either we come to terms with death or we don't,
Right.
or if we can get people to come to terms with it, or we know we're living longer,
Yep.
or what have you.
Right.
What's the best bet?
Absolutely great question, and it's something I didn't address, so thank you. So, right, children grow up, right? They do have these mechanisms, these cognitive mechanisms that we could argue are how to put it, potential religious features. But potential because what happens actually is that, yeah, we've heard that noise. It's a bird that comes out at night. I'm good. And you save that knowledge, right? So you don't have to repeat that experience. And so you begin to accumulate knowledge. Again, not just practical knowledge, so that you don't have to place those bets anymore, right? So I forget the terms they use. It's always confusing terms, but basically they say that those initial impulses start to diminish, and then something else called, I forget what they call it, but it's basically common sense, except they won't call it that. You begin to lay down these interpretations, and they keep working. And so that is a counterbalance to these religious notions. Well, you've just heard that description. What does that sound like? That sounds like, on a cultural level, the history of religion and the history of science, right? It's to use James George Fraser's schema, it's magic, it's magic. Well, I don't know what's happening, and I don't know how, but it's happening. Religion is the next stage. Oh, this is weird, but I know how it happens. Let me do it for you. To science. This actually involves atoms and, gravity and other things. So this is, and so in that schema, religious impulses decrease, scientific impulses increase. You've got the Enlightenment, and you've got the God science problem now. Right. It happens on an individual level, psychological level. It happens on a cultural, global level. Now, just as in individuals, there are cultures who do not want to give up the magic or the science, or the religion, sorry, and will hold on to it for dear life, theirs and yours sometimes, right? So that's a whole other issue. Any other? Yes?
Did you say earlier that theology was anthropology?
Ludwig Feuerbach says that.
It seems like it's backwards in a way. The
Right.
ethos is the spirit of a culture, right?
Right.
So that theology would evolve out of that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he's actually working backwards. So around his time in the late 19th century and early 20th century, they're coming out of the religious paradigm. And so he's saying, if you want to study theology, study anthropology. But I see what you're saying, right? Right. Ultimately he's saying there is no theology. There's only anthropology.